very shortly. But before that, I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about our upcoming events. One of the things we wanted to do for Ladies Who Code, by the request of a lot of people, was have Git. Amma will be telling us about Git in one of our upcoming events. And I know I did mention on the Ladies Who Code meetup group that that's going to be in March. But instead, in March, we have Amy, who's going to help us organize a really big Women in Technology International Women's event. So Amy will just talk to you a little bit about that first.
Hello. So we did this last year, and we wondered whether it would be good to do it this year as well. So in March, it's International Women's Day, which we tend to do something for every year. And last year we did a really good evening of lightning talks. So 5-minute talks. We had a mix of ThoughtWorks speakers and external speakers. It would be great to get more external speakers this time. And it's quite good for people who are maybe interested in dipping their toe in the kind of public speaking water, because it's 5 minutes, really nice, inclusive environment. So yeah, if anyone's got any thoughts on that, then it would be great to hear from you. So either reach out to Tanvi or reach out to me. But that's what we're thinking we might do at the end of March for the next Ladies Who Code, is kind of tie it in with an International Women's Day celebration, and it would be a little bit more interactive than past events. So let us know if you think that'll work, and if you want to speak, then give me a shout.
And it's going to be a wide variety of topics, as it was last year.
Last year we had a BA talking about how she got into IT from a non-technical background. We had one of our developers talking about Emily Pankhurst. Yeah. We had somebody talking about being an Android developer. Yeah. So yeah, anything goes.
There's a wide variety of topics, and there's a lot of networking, obviously, and there was sushi last year. And I remember I met Amy there and then got myself a job here as well. So anything can happen, really. So come along, do come along. And I mean, we're planning to make it a big event for the year because it is International Women's Day. So yeah, so that's a little bit about that topic. But then after that, we're going to have the Git with Amma. And now to the topic which we're having today. Anne from Sage is going to be speaking to us about cross-functional collaboration on security. Thanks for putting the topic up there. Okay, over to Anne. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so obviously security is a big topic, so I'm not going to talk about it all today because we want to go home at some point, right? So I'm going to do quite a broad people team-based approach to security, as opposed to trying to go into a big technical talk. There is still quite a lot of content, so if at any point you feel the need to go and get a beer, I won't be offended, I promise, all right? Okay, so who am I? Oh, it's locked up, excellent. Let's try that. There we go. Who am I? Right, eventually. Okay, so I'm Anne Ledwith. I'm a development team lead here in Manchester. Work for Sage. Previously worked for other companies working on genomic solutions. Worked on pharmaceutical solutions for a while, so worked in quite a tightly regulated environment. Well, very. And then came to work at Sage, working on security critical systems such as single sign-on solutions and things like that, licensing solutions. So, why are we here? Well, you may have noticed that the media might have gone a little bit hack and data breach crazy over the last few years, and rightly so, because there's been quite a lot of stuff going on. It seems like just a constant barrage of stories and slightly threatening images, such as Balaclava Man here. I love the fact that he's got a shirt and tie on as well, because you've got to have standards. Obviously, somehow we're falling a little short of the mark. So what have we done in the past? Well, traditionally, we've tried to essentially hit our systems with hammers. So we get somebody who's really, really clever and knows security to come in to test our system. So we have a penetration test, which is basically coming in and white hat hacking our systems to see if there's any problems. brilliant thing, by the way, and I'm not going to suggest that penetration testers are, anyway bad, or you should definitely do that sort of stuff. It's great, but it is at best sort of a one-time hit, a sort of a snapshot in time of how secure your system was at that point. And if you're doing anything like continuous delivery, you know that that's going to gradually start to drift. Also, inherently, you're going to need the system there in the first place to be able to test it properly. So it's something that's happening generally just before you're about to do maybe a big release. And that's possibly not the time to find a significant security problem. So maybe some slightly different approaches are better. So for me, what's the solution? Us. We're the solution. Just carrying out our daily jobs. We're the people who can make a difference. So systems don't get out there into the wild without us working on them. They don't just appear by magic. So for me, we're the key. And the key is to just take a little bit of ownership of the security of our systems and make sure that what we do is joined up, help each other out, as opposed to just thinking, well, that's not my job. That's somebody in a security ivory tower is going to sort it out for me. So that's the plan. Okay, so one of the first things we can do is, obviously I know that requirements may imply a particular life cycle. I don't mind what life cycle is going on at all. I think it's the people delivering the thing as opposed to the life cycle that's important. So when we're thinking about requirements or for new functionality that we're putting in, we should be thinking about security and what security really is from a sort of how can I put this, dictionary perspective, or at least a Wikipedia perspective, is thinking about confidentiality, which is making sure that people who shouldn't have access to information don't have it. Availability, so is the system actually up when it needs to be up? And integrity, which is, has it got the right information in it? Now, some of this might be driven, it might be out of your hands. So if you're dealing with credit card information, for example, you've got fairly high confidentiality requirements, and it was going to stipulate exactly the kinds of controls and procedures you should have in place. Again, Data Protection Act, kind of very, very keen on integrity. So if you're storing information about people, it has to be correct, and you can get fined if it's not. And availability might be driven sometimes from a more commercial perspective. So if you've got an online shop and it's down for 2 days, you've just lost several £1 million. Strangely enough, I think that's why Amazon's infrastructure is really quite good, because they like to make money. I mentioned Amazon a few times. I'm not in their employ, by the way. I've just been doing a lot of work with them recently. Okay, so as well as thinking about our requirements as we're going along, there are a couple of other activities that we can all get involved in, that very collaborative activities. And one of the first ones that I would suggest that if you haven't got involved in the past that you have a go at is threat modelling. Now, threat modelling, you can think of it almost like a virtual pen test, but you don't have to have built the system yet. So what you're doing at this point is you're thinking, if I was of a mind, how can I get in? It's a little bit like imagining, if you lose your keys and you want to get back into the house, how can you break in? It's that sort of activity. On the screen here is a diagram showing sort of one approach to threat modelling, which is data flow diagram. So this is quite a traditional approach to threat modelling, and it's based on the idea that the important stuff in our systems is the data, the information floating around in it. They're IT systems, after all, so it's about the information. So what we do when we do a data flow diagram is we'll look at sort of, data in transit. So that's what these arrows are. So our customers sending their username and password over here. We'll look at the kind of processes that are acting on data, and then we will look at where data is stored. So this sort of parallel thing here is, in this instance, probably a database, but it could easily be a file store or whatever. And then yeah, so then we would draw on things like trust boundaries, which is an art in itself, probably a whole talk on what a trust boundary is. But if you're going over the internet, that's a good idea to put a trust boundary there, because that's basically, you need to protect information as it's going over a trust boundary. We're right so far? Okay, cool. So we've got this essentially a sort of a cartoon of our system that we've drawn up, and then we start to think about how we could attack it. Our balaclava guy is back again. He's, in this case, he's some kind of corporate hacker who's trying to deface our system and ruin the company in some way. Over here, we've got a cowboy in charge of our database. So sometimes you have to consider sort of maybe the threat from internal people as well as external people. It doesn't necessarily have to be malicious. Just have to protect people from themselves in some cases. So, you know, good backup procedures and, you know, policies and things like that. And down here, it looks a little bit like the Hamburglar, but he's not the Hamburglar, honestly. He's someone trying to steal the bank details. So in this threat model, what we're thinking is, what happens? We've got a bank system there, but what if we're not actually talking to the bank? What if we're talking to somebody else with slightly more malicious intent? So, okay, cool. So once we've come up with a bunch of stuff that could be attacking us, we start to figure out how on earth we stop it from happening. So we start to put controls here, there, and everywhere, really. That's what the slide's saying. Now, this is one approach to threat modeling. And my suggestion is that this approach is quite a traditional approach, and it often tends to suit the kind of brains that go into architecture, security specialists, your hosting people, things like that. Quite often, these kind of activities haven't included developers or, you know, business analysts or things like that. They should, I think, should get involved a lot more. But there are other ways to look at threat modeling. So instead of this sort of structural view, instead we can go for a more scenario-based approach. So abuse cases are kind of based on use cases. So if you've looked at use cases in the past, it's instead of log into the system and use it nicely, it's all the things that you might want to do instead. Is everyone clear what a script kiddie is? Because I can explain it. Yeah, okay, cool. I was told that should be for the lulz, not the laws. But anyway, so an attack tree is essentially you have the thing that you want to perpetrate at the top, and then you kind of filter down all the different ways that you can achieve that aim. And what these are really good for are if you're running quite an iterative process. So if you want to think about, oh, this new feature that we're putting in, okay, how can it be attacked? And also, you know, what controls do we need to put in place to stop that attack? And also, it's really, really good for pulling out some really fantastic test cases. So if you want to start looking at making sure that your system is secure in a sort of a functional way as well. So I think it's a really good way. And the more people you can get involved in these sorts of activities, the better, because the more brains you can throw at it, different types of brains, the more chances are, that doesn't work, doesn't it? More chances that you will not miss something. And coming on to not missing something, once you've got a list of things, by the way, it's very, very key that once you've decided exactly what protections you want to put in place, that you actually make sure that they get put in place. So once you come up with your list of stuff, put it into your repository of choice, TFS or Juro or wherever, and make sure that it actually gets actioned and doesn't get forgotten about. The other thing I would stress as well is that you should be sharing these threat models with the whole team. And when I say the team, it's like from idea to a live server. Everyone in that chain should see the threat models. It'll give them an idea of the big picture. Start helping people take ownership of security, as the whole team. Okay, so we give our threat models to the architecture and hosting guys, and they come up with, you know, quite a nice architecture in Amazon. As I say, other hosting providers are available, and essentially what they will do is they will sort of start to apply layers of security a little bit like an onion. So, for example, these little dotted lines here, these are security groups in Amazon, and really all they are is a firewall. So it's what port, you know, what traffic's coming in, where's it coming from, and all it is around minimizing the attack area as much as possible. So here, for example, we've set up rules that only the web tier can talk to the database. I missed an up tier out. You know, we're making sure that essentially everything's tied down. Also, we're only talking over secure channels, so we're only talking over HTTPS. Great. Who thinks we're done? Who thinks we're secure? Yeah, okay. I thought someone might put the hand up just so that they can go home early, but yeah, please. Okay, so we put a lot of effort into this side for a start, but over here, this thing is actually what we're protecting. And we can't control that environment anything like as much as we can control this one. So they might have a mobile phone, they might have you know, a phablet or whatever device. And that's actually, if you're writing code that's going to sit on that in that environment, that's quite a hostile environment if your code is doing something like managing payment information. You were supposed to remind me to mention the fact that I don't work for SagePay.
I thought that was the next line.
I just thought I'd put that disclaimer in now. This is not a real system. Yeah, that's the thing we're protecting. So obviously the code sitting on there has got to do quite a lot of work because it's sitting in quite an interesting environment. Also, although HTTPS is brilliant, it's the thing that now fuels the internet in terms of no one would be going on there and doing banking or shopping or anything like that if it wasn't for the fact that we could do it securely. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. However, I think we need to quickly just remind ourselves what HTTPS does. So it basically is HTTPS over a secure layer, so a secure socket layer, or not anymore. I think Poodle put pay to that. TLS, so transport layer security. And basically it gives us three reasonable assurances about the communication that is taking place. One, we know who we're talking to, so there's a level of authentication going on. Two, we have an encrypted channel of communication, so hopefully no one's eavesdropping in on the conversation. And three, we have we haven't had our messages tampered with, so message authentication codes are sent with the packets essentially, so that you can see that it hasn't been messed about with from A to B. What it doesn't provide any protection for is anything else. So it doesn't provide you protection for data at rest in a database, for example. Doesn't say anything about the message itself. So it might have very securely delivered a pure packet of pure evil to your system. So still, we need to be a little bit careful when we write code. I know web application firewalls and things like that are getting better all the time, but the code we write, if we're a coder, has to take into account the fact that not everything is going to be absolutely beautiful by the time it hits your code, so it has to take a little bit of responsibility for itself. Are we still all right? Okay, cool. No one's falling asleep yet. This is good. So, isn't often that you see comics around SQL injection. So I didn't call my son Bobby Tables, by the way, just in case. He's called Josh, isn't it? So probably watching now. Hi, Josh. Yeah. SQL injection and many other attacks are taking advantage of the fact that maybe our code isn't expecting certain things. So in the same way as when we were looking at that architecture in Amazon, we were controlling exactly what came in and what came out. When you write code, it's a similar thing, sort of in miniature, as it were. So as stuff comes into our code, especially if it's been entered by a person, which most things have, so you have to treat it as untrusted content. You need to make sure that it is what you're expecting, so you need to validate your inputs. And when stuff comes back out of our code again, you have to be a little bit aware of where it's actually going. Is it going to be against the database? Is it going to suddenly appear on a person's browser, for example? Especially if it looks a little bit like JavaScript, is the person's browser suddenly going to start executing it? So as long as we write our code a little bit like a little fortress, then all is good. The other thing as well to mention here is if we can write our code always thinking about what happens when it goes wrong. So a hacker generally is tricking a computer system into a state that was never thought of by the developers or the coders, and it will usually try and do that by making something go wrong. So if we can think about what happens in our error conditions, then we're, if we're controlling what comes in, what goes out, and what happens when it goes wrong, we're almost there. Okay? And now the next two slides, I apologize, the next two slides are a personal rant. I felt some pain recently. Okay, so who's ever seen a dialogue like this on Facebook or wherever? So it's not actually that, by the way. That's not my rant. Yeah. So what this is an implementation of a standard called OAuth, Open Authorization, not authentication. I'm glad I got it the right way around. So it's basically allowing you to do things. So what can you do? That's authentication, authorization, human. So you will see it in things like Facebook. And OAuth is essentially referred to as the valet key of the internet, which probably makes more sense in America, where people actually have valet keys. And the valet key is essentially if you want to hand your extraordinarily expensive car over to someone else to park it, and the valet key will allow them to open the car, allow them to drive the car, but it won't let them go in the boot, and it won't let them go in the glove compartment, and it will only allow them to drive for several miles before it switches off. So it's like limited use of your resources on your behalf. And that's essentially that's what this is all about. It's basically saying, I only need to do these things for a certain amount of time, admittedly till the end of time. So that's what OAuth is. And the reason why I mention it is that in 2012, the second version of the protocol standard, it's not a protocol, it's a standard, came out, and there was a little bit of controversy because several people were unhappy with it and left the project, including Aaron Hammer, who was quite concerned around the lack of protection that it provided in certain flows. And he was concerned that it was only using transport layer security as protection. And his gripe there was that essentially he thought that developers can't be trusted to use cryptography properly. Now, before you go like that, before you do that, he did then say, and who can blame them? Because if you go on any coding forum and you type in SSL handshake exception, you get something nasty back, right? So I thought, I'll try that. And this is what I got. If you're a coder. So I put in SSL handshake exception, and this was on the first link that I followed. Admittedly, it hasn't got a big green tick next to it, so nobody thought that this was a fantastic idea. But it was still there. It was like number 3. And I looked at it and I just laughed because I was getting ready for this talk. I thought this was going to take me ages. And then it took me like a minute. So we were talking before about the protections that SSL provides. And one of those protections is that it tells you who you're talking to. And this lovely piece of all trusting code here switches that off completely. So your computer isn't going to check that it trusts the other computer that it's talking to. Nice work. To be fair to the coding forum, someone did actually respond to it. I did love their thing. Thank you, Ryan. You are a legend. You've just switched security off completely. On the plus side, I know exactly who would love this particular piece of code. This guy, he would absolutely love that piece of code. And this is comes around to my own personal rant. I lost a year of my life sorting out just a slight coding flaw on a piece of code dealing with cryptography, because the person who wrote this code, who left the company years before I'd started, by the way, had fundamentally misunderstood what a certificate chain is, and that a certificate chain could potentially have 3 links in it instead of just 2. So yeah, my own personal little gripe is, if you have not used cryptography before and don't understand the concepts, don't be afraid to just go, do you know what? I don't actually understand this. I might need a bit of training. Someone might have to talk me through this, that sort of thing. That's my own personal gripe over that. And by the way, if you ask the security guys, if you've got a security team in your company, they'll just be like, oh, I get to show how clever I am. Excellent. So please do. Okay, we're still all right? I can stop now for a minute if anybody wants to grab a beer. No? Okay. So the next piece, I'm going to start talking a little bit about security testing. And before I start, I want to put a massive disclaimer in to say, don't do it unless you have explicit permission to test the thing that you're about to security test. And for goodness sake, make sure that you haven't accidentally just started testing Google, for example. Could be done. And when I say explicit permission, cloud providers, as part of their terms of agreement, make you request permission before you start security testing, because they've got all kinds of protections in place. And if you start doing nasty things, you can quite easily wind up on their radar. You'll be setting alarms off here, right, left, and centre. So remember to get that permission before you start. And if you happen to live in a big corporate environment like I do at Sage, there will be protections in place there as well. So make sure you don't start triggering any of those. Start attacking outgoing proxies or anything. Okay. So there are quite a few layers to security verification. And I think that it's worth taking a collaborative approach to all of them. So secure code review, security scanning, automated testing. So that is going to be most effective if developers and testers can work together to really thrash out everything that needs to be happening in that testing and automating it. I would strongly recommend that you automate the living hell out of it, because it will definitely come back to pat you on the back if you manage to do that. Manual security testing, definitely. If you want to do some exploratory testing, but if it's something that's critical path that you need to test before you get it out into the wild, automate it as soon as possible. Now, deployment review is essentially firing up the whole system and then having a look on it to see what's actually on there. I know it sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? But go and check logs to make sure that credit card information or private information isn't being written out to logs and things like that. That credentials for access to things like databases and things like that isn't stored in the clear on those boxes. And at that point, we're talking about sort of defense in depth, that if they do get somehow compromised, someone can't do something nasty from that box, like drop your entire database, for example. So that is, again, something which, developers, testers, your ops guys and girls can all get involved in that to make sure that everything's good. And then penetration testing. So if you are going to get the clever security testy type people to look at your system, help them out. It's not a sort of a, it shouldn't be that sort of a experience. What you should be doing is saying, we've looked at this, that, and the other. Here's this, this is a good tool here. We've done all this stuff. You're going to get much more value out of those people if you really just welcome in and go, we'll help you out with that stuff. We've had some good guys have come to us. This next slide is I have to put a bit of a plug for Attack Proxy in there now. So this is a testing tool that's quite useful if you are, it's for devs and testers and things like that. It's designed to be quite user-friendly for a security testing tool anyway, because quite a lot of them are not. It's good. So in this sort of interactive web version that we got here, you can set it up between your browser and your web application, and it will look at the traffic. So you kind of almost got your own little man-in-the-middle attack going on there. And then once you've browsed around a bit, it will build up an idea of exactly what web pages and what the ins and outs of your particular system are. And then you can set it off attacking it with, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, all that good stuff. And it will even give you little red flags if you've got a problem. It's quite nice. The other thing about it is that, well, we've run Selenium through it so that you can actually do your Selenium testing whilst doing your security testing. And you can make it part of your build. So there's Maven, Ant plugins. Don't know about the .NET stack actually. But certainly if you're running Java, you can definitely include it in your build, so you can get a little mini security test every time you build, which is quite nice. It doesn't say that you've absolutely secure, but it certainly gives you a little bit more of a feeling that you've not done something stupid during the day. Other pen testing tools are available, and if you are interested in Attack Proxy, I know a guy. So if you mention it to the organisers, and we could always get him in to do a talk. In fact, sometimes it's difficult to stop him. And what else was I going to say on this stuff? Oh yeah. So if you are running lovely DevOpsy goodness, and your environments are basically on a par with each other, and you can build the whole thing up using your infrastructure as code, then if you can build the whole, hydrate the whole environment, put your application code on it, set up all your security groups, etc., then you can test the whole thing, ports and all. And you can have this really, really great assurance that not only your application code, but your infrastructure as code is up to the mark. It really gives you that potential to actually have that complete confidence when you click go live. Really nice. What else? I don't know what my next slide is now, so anything could happen. All right, something did happen. So despite our best efforts, something's gone horribly, horribly wrong. The Hamburglar here has somehow managed to get hold of lots and lots of bank account details and posted them on the internet in order to try and make our company seem bad. So after your first reaction of, hopefully you've got okay, let me put it this way, you should have an incident plan in place, right? So you should know who to contact in this particular, and this might be, you know, it's not just who can decide to, so someone might have to decide to switch your system off if it's leaking in details all over the internet. Someone needs to have the weight to be able to say that, and they need to be available 24/7. You know, who are your PR people? Quite often, the most annoying thing from a customer perspective is just not knowing what's going on. So, you know, you need to get that information out quickly, but it needs to be the right information. But one thing that your incident plan possibly isn't going to say, because it'd probably be a bit of a weird incident plan if it did, is sort of how you should all be, how you should all, you know, how to actually cope with it, if you see what I mean. So, who knows who this guy is? Unfortunately, it's a bit bleached out, but he does have a white waistcoat on. I don't know if that triggers anybody's memory. No. Okay. This gentleman is Gene Kranz, and he was flight director. He works for NASA, and he was the flight director on the Apollo 13 mission. So he was involved in something when it went about as wrong as it's possible to go, if you see what I mean. He had 3 blokes stuck up, heading towards the moon in a broken piece of tin. And yet, somehow, he managed to remain calm. He got his whole team solution focused, got them all working together, finding out ways to sort out the problem. And at the point where an incident of that nature happens to you, that's what you need to be like, especially if you're a leader. So it's the people leaders I'm talking to. People are going to take their how scared to be from your demeanour. It doesn't matter what you say, you need to be in there and being calm and, you know, come on then, this has happened, it's bad, but we're going to fix it. Tell me how we're going to fix it. That's what that conversation should be like. At the same time as you're doing that, so you're trying to create this calm environment where people can actually think about things, because, you know, tech is difficult, isn't it? You do need to actually engage brain. The rest of the company may not have got the memo, right? So the rest of the company might be like bombarding everyone with, you know, what's going on? I can't believe this is happening. Did you mess up? Did you mess up? Not the time for this. You need to basically just take that flak for your team until you find the solution, right? So, and that's what leadership is in an incident. If you are a member of the team, what you need to be is absolutely honest. Because this person is currently taking lots and lots of flack for you. And if you might have accidentally done something slightly wrong, maybe, you need to be absolutely honest, because the sooner you're honest about it, the sooner we can find a fix for it, and the sooner we can make this thing go away. So that's what I would say there. And it's actually usually, by the way, I think it's quite likely the person who might have done something slightly wrong, who is the best person to come up with a way to fix it. So anyway, we've fixed it. And at this point, if you've done all that automation-y loveliness, right, and you can get from checking in a code fix, whether it be Chef or Java, out to live as soon as possible, that's awesome, because the last thing you want is to be waiting 3 weeks, figuring out how you can fix it, to actually being able to fix it for real. Because if you're waiting 3 weeks, all your customers have gone. So we fixed it. Nice work, everyone. As soon as you possibly can, get in a room together and have a chat about that. What happened there, and why did it happen? And I don't mean, and in fact, I'll open it out to the group. Who thinks that if you go out of this meeting, this retrospective, and you go to the company, you know, the rest of the company, or your customers, or your boss, and say, well, Sally messed up, she didn't quite understand cryptography, but she's promised that she'll try harder next time. Do you think that's going to fly? No. What kind of things would you be thinking about there? What do you think actually was the root of this particular problem? If someone had made such a massive coding error, so they basically put that code in that we've seen previously, what kind of things would you think might have caused that? And what kind of things might you put in place to stop it happening? Yeah, you could have a process issue.
If you get something like that in, you could process.
One might ask how a person who knew nothing about cryptography was working on a payment system. So maybe we should have been a little bit, we should have understood the people a little bit better working on our system. So either we were very harsh about our criteria for being able to work on that system, or we actually train people up. We give people the right tools in order for them to do their own job, do their job properly. So maybe it was a training issue. And also, we did kind of miss it, didn't we? So maybe we need to think about boosting up our test cases a little bit just to make sure that we've covered off this thing. Because after all, this particular threat, the Hamburglar threat, was in our threat model. So we should have probably made sure it wasn't there, wasn't exploitable. So those are the kinds of things that I would do. Because one of the things I want to point out is that going through something like that is a massive learning experience. So you need to turn it into something positive. You need to take something out of it, improve things, make sure it doesn't happen again for everyone's sake. Okay, don't worry, I'm getting near the end now. Second to last slide, we're nearly done. All in all, we're all already having an impact on the security of the systems that we work on, right? Already. So when we go in tomorrow, if we can be a little bit more mindful of that and maybe take away, if you just take away one thing and think, I'm going to do this slightly differently tomorrow, and then I would be well chuffed. So please do. All right. If you do, you will feel the benefits because you won't have to go through that nasty thing. Your customers will feel the benefits because they don't have to go through the nasty thing, and your company will be really, really happy. And I'm done. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you want to know more about the stuff that I've talked about today, Troy Hunt is just like a secure coding guru. OWASP, that's the now I'm going to completely forget. Open Web Application Security. Or was it open?
Open Web Application Security Project. Thank
you. And there is an OWASP chapter here in Manchester. I think that their meeting tomorrow is fully booked, but generally, they meet pretty regularly. Simon Bennett's, who's the Zap guy, NIST, so that's if you want to go and have a look at cryptography standards and the like, they're really good. And there's also guidance on most things, actually. And then Microsoft has a Secure Development Lifecycle, if you haven't had a look at it. I know you might think of Microsoft, but if anyone understands what it is to be under attack, it's Microsoft. All right, I am done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I think you have a good point that everyone should be just take care of that. But sometimes, even if you try as hard as you can, it's not possible to spot that that flaw. And even Facebook or Google are paying people to spot security flaws. Is there another way to be more protected and not depend on somebody else to detect them?
What I would say is that in a scenario where you haven't really had those processes in place, the best thing that I would ask you to push for is to get all your testing and your deployment automated as much as possible, because if you're in a scenario where you can't think of everything, what you need to be able to do is to react bloody quickly. So that's what I would say. Is that what you mean, or? So especially if you have live systems that are out there in the wild now, so you haven't been able to do all of this all the way through. It almost seems counterintuitive, like you want to work backwards. That's what I would do anyway. Obviously, entirely, your systems and your development environments far better than I do. But those are the kinds of things. So the important thing is to be able to react quickly, because if you can't second guess where it's going to come from, makes sense.
Yeah.
Other than that, just say for if you're a coder and you can't just rewrite the whole thing immediately. Just start to try and improve it bit by bit where you can.
I have a question, sorry. So if you have a system that, say, doesn't handle credit cards or anything like that sort of sensitive information, where would you, because security, you mentioned, is a very, very big thing, where would you stop? Like, how much would you stretch that security?
Okay, so that would be very much up front in your requirements, and one of the things that you might want to do is to do a risk assessment on the system. So if for example, if it's down for 2 days and no one cares, why bother putting in multiple data centers and all that sort of stuff? So it is very much based on, essentially, take a damage to your company based approach, thinking about it. So if it's not going to do that much damage, then you want to maybe scale back a little bit on the protect, because for example, if you don't have high confidentiality requirements, you could be introducing more problems than it's worth if you're going to put encryption and things like that in, because that is quite computationally expensive for a start. So, and as we've touched on before, although accidents can happen with cryptography, let's put it that way. So if you don't use it if you don't need it, I think. So it is a little bit understanding what it is that you're trying to protect.
Once your system is live, is there anything you should be watching for? So things like Sony Target, people are in there for months.
They were, yeah. So yeah, one of the things I haven't really touched on is the kinds of things that you might want your ops guys and girls might want to put in place so that they have some idea that something's going on. So there's all kinds of things that you can do. Intrusion detection systems, you're kind of limited if you're going into the cloud because it has to be host-based, but stuff like that. So it's going to start looking at traffic coming in and start to try and make a call on whether it's dodgy or not. There are companies out there that you can essentially put them in front of your so if it's very old and it's had no particular care and attention in a security perspective, then yeah, there are companies out there that you can put in front of your systems a little bit. So then it's not going to be perfect, but it's certainly a lot better than just having them completely open.
Just to get an idea of like the test coverage in terms of automation testing for something like SagePay, how many just as an example, how many full end-to-end, tests would you have in that kind of system, in that kind of scenario? How many cases would you assess, edge cases, and keeping?
I don't know, because I'm not really like a tester.
Okay.
But it would basically come off just how many paths there were to attack it. I would try and get as much coverage as you can.
Okay.
But I know there's mathematical formula and stuff you can use to come up with the kind of amount of test cases.
In Selenium, we tend to use maybe if considering the test pyramid, you'd probably just put one end-to-end test doing the full journey. But as you mentioned, in security, you want to test as much as possible. Yeah. And I would imagine, given the topic is security, you would have all of them as end-to-end tests, because otherwise they're not testing everything of the infrastructure.
If you've done something like your attack trees or your abuse cases, you should try and make sure that they can't be perpetrated.
Okay.
So I would at least cover those off.
Okay.
And then just generally hit it with Hammer's approach that Z-attack proxy or a similar tool would give you as well.
Do they add a lot of time, would you say, to your whole deployment process, so to speak?
So we tend to run it overnight as opposed to as a part of a check-in build.
Okay.
Because, yeah, it does add a bit on. Because obviously it's going to try throw in pretty much the kitchen sink at your web application.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay. Do you also rely on external tools to do your, like, as you said, penetration testing?
Yeah, we bring
security
people in.
Attacks.
We bring people in because obviously there's only so much that you want to do. But I think as well that you could get sort of blind spots if you don't get someone in quite regularly. And they'll also be like, well, have we tried this tool? And oh no, we haven't seen that before.
Okay.
So a fresh pair of eyes is always a good thing on a system. Any more? Might go get a beer. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay.